you to start ready to get up. And then at about 10 or 7, they would ring 2 bells, and then they would holler for the count. And everybody would have to be out of bed, facing the front, so that they can get a visual count of you.
Now, I read an article at the beginning about how at Attica there would be buttons in each cell so that an inmate could signal that he was really there. Did you get around to putting those buttons in?
There's no buttons there.
So you would stand for the count, and an officer would see that you were there and mark you off.
Right, he'll come by and visually count you. Usually there's 2, one right behind the other, and they tally their counts against each other.
And when would that be done in the morning?
This would be about between 10 or 7 and 7 would be the count. And at 7 o'clock they would ring what they call 1 bell. And this would be the signal that the count is all right, and they would start running the different galleries to the mess hall.
Now, you said running the galleries. What do you mean by that?
What they would do is, like, there's 42 cells on a gallery, and they would open the entire gallery, and the men would come on out, line up according to height, and then they would march to the mess hall.
Now, is there single cell occupancy at Attica?
Yes, sir.
And what's the size of the cell?
Approximately 5 by 5 foot wide, maybe 9 foot deep, 7 foot high, 7.5 foot high.
And would you be given military-type orders to march, line up by height and march to the mess hall?
It depended on who it was. One officer may holler out, you know, bang a stick on the wall, line up by height, forward, march. Another one would say, okay, go ahead. You know, it was just, you didn't know, it just whoever it was.
What was the rule on talking while you were marching at that time?
Whoever it was. If one particular officer would say, I don't want talking, or you knew this is the way he was, where another one would allow it.
Now, how long would you be in the mess hall for breakfast?
Approximately, by the time you got there, you'd have time to eat. It'd be maybe 20, 25 minutes.
And what would a typical breakfast be?
Be this, have a scoop of milk. They have a scoop, and you go by, and they give you a little scoop of milk. Sometimes they'd have oatmeal or dried cereal. And on the weekends, you'd possibly have a piece of fruit. We'd have this ersatz coffee.
What do you mean by ersatz coffee?
Well, you drank it, you know what it tastes like. It's pretty bad stuff.
And after, what did you do about utensils for eating?
When you would go sit down, it'd be a spoon. You'd always have a spoon. And like on occasions, they would give you a fork. And then on even fewer occasions, you'd get a knife. It was a especially tough piece of meat. They would give you a knife to cut it with.
And would you be responsible for turning in that fork or knife before you left the mess hall?
Right. When you sit down, you always make sure your utensils were on the table. And make sure that somebody hadn't accidentally shorted them, because if you sat down and your utensils weren't there, you're hurting, because then you have to come up with a spoon or a fork or a knife, whatever's missing.
Is it hard to come up with a spoon, fork, and knife?
If it isn't there, it's hard to come up with it.
Then, after breakfast, what would you do?
Excuse me.
You'd finish breakfast about what hour?
We'd finish breakfast around 7:30, maybe 20 to 8. See, it always varied, because they'd be running the galleries different, or maybe it was late tallying the count. It'd be very, a few minutes. But then we would get back to our cells.
How would you get back to your cells? You'd be marched back again?
We would line up, we'd march back to the cells, and we would lock in again. And we'd stay locked in varying times until they were ready to let you out for work. It'd be maybe 8, quarter after, and then they would let you out for your particular job assignment.
Now, how would you go to your job assignment?
Well, all the job assignments, usually all the men that work on the same assignment, they'll put in adjoining cells. So this way, like the hospital where I worked last, they'll open 20 cells that worked in the hospital, and we'd all line up according to height and march to the hospital.
Now, how long would you work at your job in the morning?
We would, it'd be maybe 8:30 we'd get there, or between 8 and 8:30, and we'd work till around 11 or 10 after, and then we would, they'd say, going back, time to line up, and we'd line up and march back to our cells again.
And how long, what would happen to you then when you march back to your cells?
They'd march us back, we'd lock in again for the noon count. They'd have to get ready for the noon count. Would be between 25 after 11 and quarter of 12.
In the summer, you would be allowed out in the yard during this period if you wanted?
Not before lunch, it would be right after lunch. In the summer schedule would be 2 periods where you'd be out in the yard for 15 or 20 minutes, directly after meals prior to going to your job assignment.
Now, getting back to the regular schedule, you'd be marched to lunch at what hour?
Well, they'd run the count, then they would tally it, and it would be usually at noon a bell would ring, signifying that the count was all right, and then they would start the running the galleries again, opening the cells up and lining up according to height.
And was lunch the big meal of the day at Attica generally?
Yes, it was usually the largest meal. It was the best meal if there was one. And you'd line up then, and we'd all march. It'd be around 12 or 10 after 12, and go to the mess hall. And we would eat. It would be 12:30, maybe 12:40, and we would line up and march back to our cells and lock in again.
Now, how long would you stay locked in?
Till they called your particular group to go to work again. It would be approximately 1:10 after, and they would open up like where I worked at the hospital. They would open the cells up again, and you'd line up according to height and march to the hospital.
And how long would you remain at work then?
You'd work until 3 or between quarter of 3 and a quarter after. It varied then, too. And then they would tell you to line up, and you'd line up again, and you march back to your cell block.
And then what?
But this time, I worked in C block, and being a closed cell system, you had to get your water for the night, your hot water. And you'd water up, and if you wanted to, you could go to the yard till a little after 4.
Well, what do you mean by you'd water up and have to get your water for the night?
Well, the cells, you don't have any hot water. If you want to shave or wash your clothes or, wash yourself, wash your body, get some of the, clean up, you had to get your hot water at 3 o'clock where it was locking, because this is the only time you could get it.
How physically would you get the hot water?
They sell these plastic buckets in the commissary. I believe they're, just rubber-sized plastic buckets, and you get one or two of those, and you go down to this water room and fill up your bucket with water and take it back to your cell. And
would that be the only hot water that you would have for the whole day, except on your day to go to showers?
Right. This had to suffice until you got out again.
Now, you said you'd get your water, and then if you wanted to go in the yard, you'd go in the yard?
It was optional. You could go to the yard, or you could lock in your cell.
And if you chose to go to the yard, what would you do?
Well, you could walk around the yard, or they have sports. In the fall, they have football. In the winter, they have volleyball. In the spring, they had baseball, and they had handball court. Or you could play checkers or cards.
Now, did you go to the yard much?
No, not too much.
We have to pause for a moment while the court stenographer replaces his paper. How is it going?
During the break in the proceedings, the court stenographer is changing his